Os querría presentar a la doctora Patricia además de otras muchas cosas que yo puedo contar de ella, puedo contar que trabajamos juntas en que los indicadores que se recogen en los centros comprometidos con la excelencia tengan mayor valor, y somos parte del comité externo de RENAU para justo la evaluación de esos indicadores. Pero además, Patricia es profesora titular y presidenta de una institución en la Universidad de Alabama en Birminghan. Se unió a esa facultad en 2008 después de haberse retirado de la carrera de casi 26 años en el Cuerpo de Enfermeras del Ejército de los Estados Unidos. Enseña en el programa de doctorado, es asesora a estudiantes y becarios postdoctorales y realiza investigación sobre el personal de enfermería, el entorno de la práctica y los resultados de calidad y seguridad de los pacientes. Actualmente es investigadora principal de un estudio sobre mortalidad, reingresos y el failure to rescue, falta de rescate en los hospitales militares. Ella y su equipo completaron recientemente una evaluación del programa del sistema de cuidados del paciente en el Ejército de los Estados Unidos y han creado un modelo innovador de prestación de cuidados en ese ámbito. Nos va a hablar sobre los indicadores de enfermería, sobre los datos necesarios para la evaluación de los resultados de la práctica enfermera. Y sin más, you can start it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maite, for that generous introduction. It's really an honor to be here. This is my first time in Spain, so thank you for the introduction. My husband and I have been enjoying Spain immensely, from Granada to Toledo to Madrid to Sevilla. I will be speaking about my own program of research and also about some of the outcomes evaluation from the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario's Best Practice Spotlight Organization's Nursing Indicators for Research and Evaluation, or NQUIRE. I serve on the International NQUIRE Advisory Board along with Dr. Maite Moreno. That's how we know each other. Thank you. The objectives for my session will be to define what are nursing-sensitive indicators, what's the history behind nursing-sensitive indicators, why did they come about, at least in the U.S., what is the rationale for measuring what we do as nurses and the outcomes of our nursing care. We'll describe some study results from my work demonstrating the value of nursing-sensitive indicators and the value of continuous measurement. We will also look at several data repositories for nursing-sensitive indicator data and describe the benefits of participating in these kind of databases. Nursing-sensitive indicators are essentially measures that are potentially or actually associated with nursing structural or process factors. Outcome measures can be patient measures, nurse measures, or organizational measures. So what do I mean by structure and process and outcomes? For that, I will turn to Avitas Donabedian, who created the quality framework using structure, process, and outcomes. Structure refers to the characteristics of your setting, whether it be a hospital, a home health agency, the community. Some of the structural measures that I use in my research are staffing, nurse staffing. How many nurses do you have? What's the education of your nurses? What's the work environment that your nurses work in? Is it conducive to delivering high quality care, or is it not? The process variables or indicators are such things as what nurses do, sort of the delivery of nursing care elements such as pain management or emotional support of the patients. Organizational outcomes, when we think of those, we think of mortality across an organization or a health system, falls, how many patients fall, what's the percentage of the patients that fall and that have injuries with the falls. We often measure pressure injuries, formerly known as pressure ulcers to those who are older, and also nurse burnout and other organizational variables like the vacancy rate of nurses. How short of nurses is your hospital or your health system? Readmissions is another measure of organizational outcomes that we measure in the U.S. Now, this was a real win for nursing. The National Quality Forum is an organization in the United States that endorses and updates and standardizes metrics for health systems, for inpatient care, for ambulatory care. They standardize definitions, measurement strategies, and most of the measures that NQF is concerned with are things that physicians would do. Outcomes for physicians, hemoglobin A1C, physicians and other healthcare providers like nurse practitioners, of course, but they did not think about or endorse any measures for nursing care. We know that some of these measures are very much associated with nursing care, such as patient falls. Failure to rescue is death following a complication in surgical patients. And nurses have a lot to do with that. You know, if you don't have enough nurses on staff to surveil your patients, to watch your patients, they can go downhill and have problems very quickly. So we need enough nurses to be able to do that. Of course, nurses have a role in preventing pressure injuries, preventing falls. Restraint prevalence, which we don't use a lot of restraints anymore, but they still are in use in some cases. Catheter-associated infections, central line infections, ventilator-associated pneumonia. These are all indicators that nurses have a role in preventing the adverse events. Some of the nurse-centered interventions like smoking cessation, NQF did away with those after about 2012, but this is the original set of nursing-sensitive indicators that have been endorsed by a national organization. The system-centered measures are things that we measure a lot in my system. Nursing skill mix, or what % of your staffing is registered nurse. Nursing care hours per patient per day. In the work that I'll be talking about, we measured nursing care hours per patient per shift. We didn't aggregate data up to the month, we looked at the shift. The practice environment scale of the Nursing Work Index, how many are familiar with this instrument? A few?
Yeah.
Okay, good. This is an instrument that was developed from work that was begun in the 1980s. That was a long time ago, on work with magnet hospitals. The practice environment scale of the Nursing Work Index has a list of characteristics that are present in good nurse working environments. And that is highly predictive of a lot of outcomes. And then voluntary nurse turnover is another example of a system-centered measure and one that the National Quality Forum endorsed. So let's go back a few more years beyond the National Quality Forum, and I want to talk about where some of this idea of measuring nursing-sensitive indicators came from. And although I have the timeline starting at 1995, in 1996, in 95 this report was being worked. In 96 the report came out. So the American Nurses Association started acting even before this report came out. But in the 90s in the US, there was major reconstruction in hospitals. Major changes in the way nursing staff were allocated. You know, nursing staff is the largest % of the cost for a hospital. It's the largest human resources percentage in a hospital. And because hospitals were trying to save money, guess what they did? they cut their nursing staffs. We had many reports in newspapers of patients dying because there weren't enough nurses to take care of them. So our Institute of Medicine in the US, which conducts a lot of scientific studies on problems that are present, conducted a study on nursing staff in hospitals and nursing homes. And what they concluded was that there was no empirical evidence that nurse staffing made any difference. It's not that nurse staffing didn't make a difference, it was that there was no evidence. There was no research in this area. So that began a huge uptake of research in this area. And at this same time, the American Nurses Association began to identify some of these outcomes that are sensitive to nursing care. And they actually created a report card for nurses. And I don't think this, oh yeah, there we go. There's the little red dot. So the ANA started this report card for acute care settings. So we're focused on the hospital only at this point. They came up with a series of measures that could be sensitive to nursing care. So the California Nursing Outcomes Coalition, now called the Collaborative Alliance for Nursing Outcomes, said we will test some of these indicators. We will collect data in California because California in the US has great data repositories on patients, and they have had for a long time. So CalNOC started collecting some of these data to test the indicators. Are they really sensitive to nursing care? A few years later, we developed, the American Nurses Association developed this national database of nursing quality indicators, or NDNQI. NDNQI collects data from hospitals. It's a voluntary process that hospitals pay for, and they collect data on staffing, on other nursing sensitive indicators, on falls. I believe they're collecting data on medication errors, patient satisfaction and experience, and others. At about the same time, RNAO, the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, started this best practice guidelines program, which you'll hear more about later. And my work started in about 2002 on this military nursing outcomes database, which was very similar in its metrics to this NDNQI data set. Now, in 2000, between 2000 and 2004, the Institute of Medicine again studied medical errors in hospitals. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the book To Err is Human, but this book showed that more patients die from medical errors in hospitals than from HIV/AIDS, from automobile accidents, and from other things combined. They've estimated the deaths due to medical error in hospitals to be about 144,000 a year. 144,000 people a year die. Later research has shown that it's about 400,000. It's a lot more than what IOM initially estimated, because we know more now about errors and why they exist and how to deal with them. The National Quality Forum endorsed that set of nursing indicators in 2004. And in 2012, RNAO started their NQuire program that measured nursing quality indicators for research and education. Now, remember that all of the measurement strategies, all the measures up to this point have been in hospitals. But what do we know about where patient care is delivered? There's a lot of patient care delivered in the ambulatory setting, right? In primary care. So this American Academy of Ambulatory Care Nurses established some quality indicators very, very recently. Look how long it's taken to get indicators for ambulatory nursing care. We don't have set indicators for home health yet, for community health yet. So there's a lot of work to be done in this area, and I hope you'll join the efforts to do some of this work. We are now testing in the military some of the ambulatory indicators and to see if they are indeed sensitive to nursing care. But it's very difficult because in ambulatory care, at least in the US, it is not standardized. You'll go to one clinic and the nurses will be doing a set of activities. You go to another clinic and they're doing different activities. So our systems are not standardized for primary care for the RN role in primary care. Nurse practitioners, they've got it, but not the RNs. An interesting thing happened in 2015 to 2019. Remember I said that the American Nurses Association owned the NDNQI data set. They owned all that data. In order to mine it, you just had to go to ANA, fill out some forms, get IRB approval, and you get the data. But now, a for-profit company bought the NDNQI. They also bought the CalNOC database. So our national nursing databases now are owned by a for-profit company. I've gotten approval to use some of their data, and it wasn't very difficult, but I know some people on the inside, so that might have made it easier. I'm not sure how easy it is to access that data now. Now I'll be talking a little bit about my military nursing outcomes database project. And because this was funded by a military organization, the Tri-Service Nursing Research Program, and because it's associated with the military, I need to say a disclaimer that I do not represent the United States government or the United States Army, that these are my opinions and my assertions. So, have to do that. Remember the National Quality Forum indicators? Well, for our military nursing outcomes database measures, we use some of those standardized definitions. And it's important when you're creating a database of indicators that everyone knows and uses the standardized definitions. Because what is a fall? When we started this work by identifying definitions back in the 90s, people had different definitions of what a fall is. You know, if you caught a patient while they were falling, is that still a fall? So there were a lot of definitional things that needed to be worked out. We needed to standardize definitions. These are all the variables that we measured in this shift level database. One of the things that we did differently in the military, because the military has different categories of providers, and the U.S. military owns their own hospitals, okay? We don't work in civilian hospitals. We see military patients, their families, their children, and retired military people. So there are old people in the military hospitals, the old retirees like me. But in the military, we have military nurses, we have civilian civil service nurses, we had contract nurses or temporary or agency nurses, and we also had some reservists because this work was being done during the time of the Operation Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom, where we had a lot of reservist nurses replacing those who went to war. So the indicators that are in red here are the ones from the National Quality Forum that we measured, and the others in black are the ones that we've created standardized definitions for, such as a medication administration error. When we counted medication administration errors, we didn't count errors in ordering. That was a physician error. We didn't count errors in dispensing. That's a pharmacy error. We counted only the errors that had to do with nursing administration of medications. Now, I don't know if you all have measures of patient acuity, but that's essentially the level of nursing care a patient needs. And in this system, we had a standardized way of measuring that. That was determined by time and motion studies from many, many years ago, and has been updated. So we had a measure of patient acuity. How sick are the patients on your floor or your ICU? We also had a measure of patient turnover, which is how many admissions, transfers, discharges are you having during a shift? And that's something that's not always measured, but we felt that this really does impact the workload of nursing when it takes maybe 2 to 3 hours to admit a patient. And it takes a long time to discharge someone when you have to do a lot of discharge teaching. So we wanted to measure those too. So why did we even do this work? It was very painful at first to bring the hospitals up to collecting this data every shift. Think about inputting your staffing every shift. We noticed the growing trend at this time towards standardized measurement of nurse staffing and patient outcome indicators, the work of American Nurses Association. And in the Department of Defense, we didn't have any way of measuring these things on a system level. We didn't collect data on how much staff we had. You could walk up to a nurse manager and say, what's your average skill mix on your unit? And they wouldn't know, because nobody was measuring this. So we wanted to create a valid and a reliable database consisting of these staffing and safety indicators to support evidence-based clinical and administrative decisions. So if we were measuring pain management and we saw that that pain wasn't being managed correctly, effectively, we wanted to bring that to the attention of the hospital leaders so that protocols could be in place to deal with that. We wanted to provide a basis for internal and external comparisons. We wanted to compare with what was published in the literature based on what ANA did, American Nurses Association. And we worked closely with the California Nursing Outcomes Coalition throughout this whole process of setting up this database. And of course, we wanted to analyze the relationship between staffing and outcomes, but at the shift level. A lot of research has been done since at the month level, at the hospital level, at the annual level, but those nurses, those of you who work in the inpatient setting probably understand that shifts aren't all the same. People call in sick, they might not be replaced, so you're working short. You're working short-staffed on some shifts. You don't always have the same patient load. Sometimes you have more. Sometimes you have a big turnover of patients that adds to the workload. So we wanted to tie these events that happen at a shift, like a medication administration error, to what kind of staffing is on that shift. So that's why we chose to do shift level analysis. And again, it's very difficult to do. So our primary research questions, and in the results section, I'm not going to go through every single chart and graph. I just wanted to show you, like, these are some of the associations that we found, so I'll briefly go through those. We wanted to know if occurrences of these adverse events are associated with staffing on the shift level. So medication administration errors, falls with and without injury, needle stick injuries among nurses. And you might say, why should nurses have needle stick injuries? We have those protective devices now. We had needle stick injuries. We looked at the proportion of staff who were RNs, that's RN skill mix. We looked at the total nursing care hours per patient per shift and staff category. And then we wanted to know, we continued this measurement process over a period of about 6 years. Was there any change? Was there any difference? Now, unlike RNAO, who created best practice guidelines, we did not do that. We left it up to the organizations to decide what to do about the data that we were showing them. So this gives you an idea of how we acquired the data and how we disseminated our reports. So each shift, the nurse manager or the charge nurse entered the staffing and census, patient census, into a spreadsheet that was on their unit computers. Every month, we got from the patient safety department all of the incident reports. Incident reports meaning reports of falls, adverse events, medication errors, needle stick injury data, and we noted the time, the date, and the unit. And we matched these two data sources, these two, so we had staffing and adverse events on a shift. Once a year, we did patient and staff surveys. We did semi-annual or annual pressure injury and restraint use prevalence studies. We had a team that did data checks, data quality checks when the data were coming in. If there were huge outliers in the data that maybe someone made a mistake entering, we contacted the nurse managers of that unit to verify. So this was a very hands-on project. We had 57 units in 13 hospitals, and we knew each one of those nurse managers. We prepared the reports, disseminated them to hospitals. In many cases, the chief nurses and the nurse managers wanted us to brief them and to help explain the data to them because they weren't used to looking at these kind of data. We created newsletters where best practices could be shared across hospitals. We didn't mandate that they share anything. We didn't mandate that they do anything. We just expected that when you see your falls are higher than the other hospitals or the other units that are similar to yours, then, you know, it motivates people to do something about that. And that's what we counted on. So we standardized our data collection processes. We standardized the definitions. And then, as I said before, we merged the adverse events with the unit, the date, and the shift that they occurred on. We used Bayesian hierarchical logistic regression. We separated out the unit types. You know, medical surgical units are a lot different than intensive care units. And in order to really get a picture of the ICUs or the med-surg units and to compare them with each other, we wanted separate analyses. So this gives you an idea of our sample, and I must say that the total under large hospital is incorrect. I added these up just before, and that should be 42, not 46. So we had 22 med-surg units in large hospitals, 9 in small. We had step-down units only in large hospitals. Now, step-down units are between intensive care and med-surg. So if somebody had open heart surgery, before they go to a med-surg unit, they would go to a step-down unit. It's often called intermediate care. And then we had quite a bit of critical care units, 12 in large hospitals and 6 in small hospitals. So we had a total of 57 units to work with, and 115,000 shifts to look at. This gives you an idea of some of our staffing covariates. In the military, a lot of licensed practical nurses are used because we need them for wartime, so we have them working within our hospitals. The unlicensed are patient care technicians. And you can see our breakdown of military versus civil service nurses. And actually, we have more civil service nurses in these military units than we have active duty military. And you can see how in the ICU, we have much more nursing care hours per patient per shift than we have in med-surg or step-down. Now, we used an 8-hour shift system. So if your unit worked 12-hour shifts, we allocated 8 hours to day shift and 4 hours of that 12-hour shift to evening shift. Because we had a spread of different kind of shifts, some hospitals had 10-hour shifts, some had 12-hour shifts, some had 8-hour shifts, and some had 4-hour shifts, like that they would bring extra people in for. So we standardized the shifts to 8-hour shifts. And we created sort of cheat sheets for the charge nurses to use. So to talk about how to separate 12-hour shifts into 8-hour shifts. Now the staffing is very good here. You can see the bottom row patient to RN ratio. 4.8 med-surg patients per RN, that's pretty good staffing. So we had much better staffing in these hospitals than there was in the civilian sector. And actually, I was at Walter Reed Army Medical Center when this study was started, and we had a lot of contract nurses who would come from the civilian hospitals and want to work for us because they had less patients to take care of. So the adverse events, this slide shows the incidence of adverse events over all shifts. So for falls without injury, 1% of the shifts had a fall without injury. So 974 shifts had a fall without injury over 99,412 shifts. Not all 115,000 shifts had all the data that we needed, so we had to eliminate the ones who didn't have the data. So the falls with injury were much rarer, but 22% of falls resulted in an injury. Medication errors were higher than falls. In 1.4% of the shifts, medication administration error was committed. Needle stick injuries, as I said earlier, were rare, and they should be rare because we have a lot of needleless devices. But what happens when someone does a procedure at the bedside that involves a needle? Maybe they sutured something. Oftentimes people leave their trays on the bed for the nurse to clean up. Does that happen in your hospitals? That's how nurses were getting stuck. It wasn't misuse of the needleless systems. But the thing to see here is that 79% of the needle stick injuries were with contaminated needles, blood-contaminated needles. As expected, med-surg units had most adverse patient events. Critical care had least. Critical care units are staffed very well overall, I would have to say. Critical care nurses have banded together. We have a very strong critical care nursing organization in the United States, and I don't know of very many ICUs where nurses take care of more than 2 patients. In the military, it was usually 1-on-1 or 1-to-2, but that second patient was a lighter load. This shows you odds ratios that were statistically significant. And I just want to point out a few. Remember I said we were mostly concerned about staffing and skill mix and how they associated with these adverse events. You can see skill mix. A 10% decrease in RN skill mix was associated with a 21% increase in the probability of falls on a med-surg unit. With higher falls in critical care, higher falls with injury both in med-surg and in critical care. Nursing care hours per patient day, less of an effect, but still an effect of more falls with a decrease in 1 hour of nursing care per patient per shift. Now, those numbers, if you're a nursing administrator, Do those numbers really mean anything to you? Probably not. So I'm going to show you how we broke down this data to make it more meaningful. This is the medication administration errors, and you can see these are only the statistically significant odds ratios, and the 10% decrease in RN skill mix was associated with more med errors in med surg and in critical care, and here in needle sticks in all three unit types. Civilian nurses, those civil service nurses, in military hospitals, they have the most experience. In military hospitals, nurses come in right out of nursing school and they work on med-surg units. So the new nurses have very little experience. It's up to the civilian nurses to teach the military nurses how to be good nurses. And so they precept and they teach. So the civilian nurses, on average, have 10 more years of nursing experience than the military do. And so shifts that have more civilian nurses on this shows you had higher percentage of med errors and higher needle stick injuries, and that was an unexpected finding. We would expect the military percent to have higher falls, etc. So this is how we presented the information in an American Journal of Nursing article, and also to the stakeholders when we were explaining the results to nurse leaders who were not nurse researchers. So if you have a 10% decrease in skill mix, so how would you have a 10% decrease in skill mix on a shift? Let's say you have 10 staff on your shift, 5 of them are RNs and 5 of them are not RNs. The skill mix, the staff skill mix, the RN skill mix is 50% RNs, right? If one RN calls in sick and you replace that RN with someone who's not an RN, now your skill mix is 40% RNs. So you see how a drop in skill mix could occur if someone calls in sick, if someone has to go somewhere else, etc. So we presented it in this manner for our stakeholders. So you would have these probabilities with the 10% drop in RN skill mix. A 1 hour drop in total nursing care hours per patient per shift would result in these probabilities. A higher probability in med-surg of all of these adverse events. Med-surg is where the staffing on the shift was very, very variable, meaning we had skill mixes from 30% to 80% on one unit over a week when we looked at all the shifts on that one unit. So anyway, let's go to, has this measurement made any difference over time? And we could see here that from baseline to the 10th quarter of data collection, we had a 69% decrease in patient falls. Statistically significant. Medication errors. We had a 50% reduction in medication errors as a result of this measurement strategy. And again, we didn't demand that they implement best practice guidelines. Patient falls with injury. Now, although this wasn't statistically significant, the falls with injury rates decreased by 30%. Hospital-acquired pressure injury dropped by 62% over that period of time, over 4 years. And that was statistically significant. So what did we learn? We learned that there's significant variation in shift-to-shift staffing. And those of you who work in acute care, I challenge you to look at your staffing from shift to shift and see what the variability is. Poorly staffed shifts are likely to have bad outcomes, and we had good, well-staffed shifts and poorly staffed shifts. Every shift must be staffed appropriately with attention not only to the numbers of staff, which is nursing presence, but also the skill mix or the expertise and the experience level of the staff. Acuity, how sick are the patients? That's important. It's an imperfect measure of workload, but it's important to consider when you're thinking about how to staff a unit. Measurement matters. By measuring nursing indicators, we saw significant improvements in patient outcomes. We had limitations, of course. We used adverse event reports, which are voluntary reports. Oftentimes, medication errors are likely to be underreported because sometimes nurses don't know that they committed a medication error. Or sometimes it's not a big deal because a medication error could be defined as a medication that's given 30 minutes late or an hour late, and the nurses don't think it's a big deal, so they might not report that. However, even with underreporting, if we had underreporting, we found significant associations with staffing. Falls with injury are typically reported because the patients usually have some additional care requirements that the nurses have to do. We didn't control for fall risk, and we didn't control for medication doses dispensed. That would have been very difficult data for us to get. So what happened as a result of this? The Army Nurse Corps adopted this strategy for an Army clinical outcomes database, which morphed into evaluation metrics for a new patient care framework called the Patient Caring Touch System. So they're still using the metrics, although they're not collecting shift level measures, but still using these metrics today to evaluate nursing care. One thing that was a real win for our patients was that we noted pressure injuries on the occipital area, the back of the head, in many of our injured soldiers coming back from the war. This resulted in aeromedical evacuation policy changes, better mattresses in flight, because that's why they were getting the pressure ulcers. They were laying on a flat, hard mattress, flying from Landstuhl, Germany to Washington, D.C. That's a long flight to be laying on a flat mattress. We educated hundreds of staff in how to conduct pressure ulcer prevalence studies. The junior staff assisted us. We gave them continuing education credits. So we conclude that this is an efficient and replicable initiative for inpatient care measurement, and evidence-based management is what we need to move towards, and it requires data for decision making. Here's some references that are available upon request. I can send them to Maite. And I wanted to briefly discuss RNAO's program, because their program is much, much more robust than our little military nursing outcomes database project with only 13 hospitals. RNAO is their best practice guidelines program is characterized by rigorous guideline development and revision methodology, something we didn't do with our program. They provide implementation strategies, tools, supports, and evaluation. This talks about their rigorous methodology. They have many people that are involved with their guideline development, including guideline development methodologists, project coordinators, health science librarians, expert panel members, stakeholder reviewers, evaluation analysts, implementation specialists with oversight by RNAO's senior leadership team. All of the guideline development methodologists are at least master's prepared. They conduct systematic reviews. This is how they do their systematic reviews, and they use the Agree to Standards, an internationally recognized tool to assess the quality and reporting of practice guidelines. This complicated slide I'm not going to go through. I just wanted to show you the rigorous methodology that the quality indicators for RNAO undergo. Their indicator development is integrated with the process of guideline development. So when they're developing guidelines, they're developing nursing order sets. They're developing evaluation strategies so that you can evaluate the results of those guidelines. They have their best practice guidelines fall within 4 categories: foundational or basic nursing, clinical, population and public health is something that a lot of people here might be interested in, and system and healthy work environment. Many of these guidelines are translated into different languages, and you can download them free of charge on RNAO's website. The RNAO CEO, Doris Grinspun, talks a lot about social movement and how you empower health through knowledge, not just empowering nursing to provide that health, but empowering health. They have many tools for implementation. They use the knowledge to action framework, which some of you might be familiar with. This implementation guide is awesome. We use it with our students. You can download it free. This is the purpose of what RNAO does. Transforming and empowering nursing through knowledge. There's various types of best practice spotlight organizations, and there's direct national host. Maite knows all about this, and you can ask her more questions about these various types of best practice spotlight organizations. This is incredible. You saw when RNAO started their best practice guidelines dissemination. Now there's 881 healthcare organizations that are using these healthcare and academic organizations that are using these best practice guidelines and our best practice spotlight organizations. That's an incredible amount of data that they have now. This blurry slide was given to me by RNAO. They didn't have a clearer slide, but I just wanted you to see all the BPSOs all over Spain. Lots of them. Their evaluation pillar. This is remarkable to me because I've seen this Enquire database grow. That nursing quality indicators for research and education, Enquire, it's a database that monitors the progress and evaluates the implementation of these guidelines within the organizations. So the organizations choose what guidelines they want to measure, and they send data to RNAO, who collates the data, and you can actually download your own reports from their data system. It is remarkable. Maite and I serve on their International Advisory Board, and we've seen this grow. This just shows you some of the guidelines, and I want to get to the outcomes. What are some of the outcomes of this Best Practice Spotlight Organization program? There has been an 85% decrease in the incidence of pressure injury across all of these international organizations from 2013 to 2018. Huge, huge change. And remember, they give you the guidelines, you implement the guidelines, they help you evaluate. This is in one Ontario hospital. You can see the drop to almost no pressure injuries in 2018. This is a reduction in falls for all of the Ontario hospitals. 62% reduction in 7 years. RNAO is doing some economic analyses too, which is something that absolutely needs to be done in nursing. We need to demonstrate the economic value of the care that we provide. They show a $2.7 million cost savings or cost avoidance over 1 year, just with the falls reduction and the pressure injury reduction. That's phenomenal. So, this kind of shows some of the policy implications of this work. The RNAO wanted to create these supervised injection services for people who abuse substances. And this is controversial, but RNAO stood beside it, stood behind it. The CEO talked to the delegation of the Toronto Board of Health in support of supervised injection services. Members signed action alerts to support this. And in July 2016, after not even a year, like 6 months of the CEO going on her rampage and saying we need these supervised injection services, the Toronto City Council approved 3 of those supervised injection services in the city. So this is an example of how this evidence informs public policy. It also goes the other way, where public policy drives the need for evidence-based resources. And that's what happened with the supervised injection services, where policy problems drove that need. This is a book that has been published by RNAO on their journey and their measurement and their successes. It's going to, this isn't a commercial, okay? I'm not advocating that you run out and buy this book. Please understand that. But in December, this book is going to be released in Spanish. Maybe in December? Are you the one who's, oh, maybe January? But it's a very good book on how this program was started, what sustains it. Actually, the success sustains it, really. And I want to thank you on behalf of myself and also on behalf of Doris Grinspun, the CEO of RNAO. So thank you very much. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, I have to listen with this thing.
You can stay here, you have a microphone. Yes, stay here. Bueno, muchas gracias, Patricia, muchas gracias por tu conferencia. En algunos de los ejemplos que has puesto, somos conscientes de que Doris es capaz de convencer a quien haga falta de lo que haga falta en 6 meses. O sea que parte del éxito de las clínicas de supervisión de inyecciones en personas con adicciones, yo creo que es también parte de la persuasión de la persona que lo intenta. En lo que tú nos has presentado, y luego damos paso a las preguntas, yo sí que tengo una duda siempre, es la diferencia entre Estados Unidos y España. Es que las enfermeras que hacen práctica clínica, que están a pie de cama en nuestros hospitales, son todas registered nurses, lo que vosotros consideráis RN. Con lo cual, nosotros no tenemos skill mix en nuestra práctica clínica. Pero la realidad actual es que tenemos una mezcla de formación, porque realidad o no en otros países, en nuestro país es una realidad vigente que en la práctica clínica tenemos, todas son registered nurses, porque es por ley, pero ya hay mucha gente que tiene másteres profesionales o especialidades, y mucha gente que ha hecho su doctorado, pero que continúa trabajando en la práctica clínica. mucha gente. Entonces yo creo que es una realidad que no se debe dar en otros países, pero que en nuestro país se da, que tú puedes encontrarte como paciente en un hospital una enfermera que ha acabado sus 4 años de bachelor, una enfermera que ha hecho sus 4 años de bachelor más un máster o más una especialidad reglada en el ámbito en el que está trabajando o en un ámbito parecido o no o nada, o gente que ha hecho su doctorado y que sigue trabajando en la práctica clínica. Entonces, no sé si eso ocurre en vuestro país o si eso se consideraría también skill mix a la hora de dar cuidados a los pacientes.
Thank you. I wouldn't consider that skill mix. I would look at an indicator called educational preparation and maybe educational mix. In the U.S., we have diploma nurses, not very many anymore. Associate degree nurses are the majority. Bachelor's prepared nurses and a few master's prepared nurses that still work at the bedside. PhD nurses generally don't. But you could look at the educational mix, but I think also it's important to look at the level of experience, the years of experience. And there's various ways you can look at that. We typically measure, in my work, years experience as a nurse, years experience in the hospital, years experience on the unit. A problem with my university hospital at University of Alabama at Birmingham is that the young nurses want to immediately go back to school and get a master's and get away from the bedside and be nurse practitioners. And that's very sad to me. So their turnover is enormous. And speaking to the nurse managers, that's their biggest problem, is they get brand new nurses constantly. I think about 6 out of about maybe 4,000 nurses, 600 a year are new. Every year there's new nurses coming, new nurses, because nurses get a little tiny bit of experience and they leave. I think what we need to do on the academic side is demand at least a year nursing experience, maybe 2 years nursing experience, in order to come for your master's, but we don't do that. And it would be difficult to convince our academic leaders of that, because our job is to educate. But I think we need to really be concerned about the longevity of nurses at the bedside. Okay. No questions?
Yeah.
Come on.
Abrimos, si queréis, un turno de preguntas. Los micrófonos están por algún sitio, al fondo. ¿Al fondo los micrófonos o al fondo la pregunta? Al fondo los micrófonos, vale. Es que no soy capaz de verte. Creo que eres Isabel, pero no soy capaz de verte. ¿Alguna pregunta en la sala?
Yeah, she had a question.
Isa. Gracias.
English, Spanish.
Sí,
English.
en español, y se lo van a traducir, o yo se lo
Vale,
voy a
perfecto.
traducir al Marco.
Vale, lo primero de todo, gracias y enhorabuena por la presentación. Me ha impresionado bastante el ratio que tenéis de pacientes por enfermera. Creo que has dicho que en los hospitales civiles son superiores al que has mostrado aquí,
Oh, yeah.
pero es muy inferior a lo que tenemos aquí en España. ¿Allí en tu país está regulado por alguna ley el ratio paciente por enfermera?
Only in the state of California is there a mandatory nurse-to-patient ratio, and that ratio on medical surgical units is 5 patients per nurse. Typically, we just conducted a study in Alabama, and nurses on med-surg units, medical surgical units, are taking care of about 6 patients. Psychiatric nurses are taking care of 9 patients apiece. Rehab nurses are taking care of about 8 patients apiece. And to me, that's not acceptable. 6 patients maybe in a small hospital, but when you talk about a teaching hospital, a very large hospital, those patients are very, very, very sick on the medical surgical units. And in some hospitals, I think even taking care of 5 patients might be too many, especially when you have a young, inexperienced nursing staff. So there's a lot that goes into staffing decisions, but I think nurse managers and nurse administrators need to reevaluate their staffing, their usual staffing periodically, because the patient acuity in hospitals is rising. We've seen it in our work. It's incredible. The patients that I used to take care of on a med-surg unit when I started some 30-some years ago now are treated at home. The ones we had in the ICU are now on med-surg floors. So patient acuity is something very, very important to consider in the workload of nurses.
Gracias, porque es que yo trabajo, por ejemplo, en cirugía y estoy acostumbrado a llevar una media de entre 6 y 12 pacientes por turno, lo cual me parece que es una barbaridad.
Entre 6 y...
Entre 6 y 12 pacientes por turno a mi cargo. Entonces, creo que esta experiencia sería positiva para desarrollar políticas en esa línea. Gracias.
Yes, the American Nurses Association just came out with the revised guidelines for staffing. I haven't read them yet. They used some of our work in the previous edition to say that managers and administrators need to consider a variety of factors, not just patient-to-nurse ratio, but the experience level of your staff, the sickness of your patients, the technological implications of the care that you're giving, et cetera. So there's a lot of considerations. Thank you for your question.
Una pregunta más antes de que acabemos. ¿Tenéis? Una. Ok, tenemos 2 manos, pues 2 preguntas, ¿vale? Okay.
Muchas gracias. ¿Se escucha?
Sí.
Muchas gracias, Patricia, por la magnífica exposición que has compartido con nosotros. Me gustaría profundizar un poco en la reflexión que ha iniciado Maite en relación a la importancia del skill mix y del nursing staffing levels, es decir, las cargas de trabajo en enfermería. Creo que en España estamos bastante familiarizados con la medición de indicadores de proceso y de resultado en términos de caídas, úlceras, pero creo que tenemos una asignatura pendiente en relación al impacto que tienen los profesionales, la dotación de los hospitales y la formación de los profesionales en los indicadores cualitativos y cuantitativos. En ese sentido, y dada vuestra experiencia en Estados Unidos, ¿cuál podría ser la estrategia a seguir y cómo habéis potenciado el poner en valor esos indicadores y su impacto en el cuidado y la salud del paciente? Gracias.
Well, I can offer several suggestions. Quality and safety is a big deal in the United States now, and measurement is part of quality and safety. And what we've been encouraging is nurse managers to get their master's degrees and to learn about quality and safety and measures and metrics and indicators and staffing, et cetera. So I can't make that a policy across the United States. I wish I could, but we've done that in our local hospital, which is a magnet facility. And the chief nurse demanded that every nurse manager have a master's degree. And that's what we've taught them in our master's degree program. So that's one strategy. Nurse managers have to know this stuff. Do we expect staff nurses to be measuring things and creating charts and graphs? Maybe not, but they should understand the implications and they should see what's being measured. In many cases, in our university hospital and in other hospitals that participated in the National Database for Nursing Quality Indicators, the staff nurses would never see the reports. The reports would be looked at by the chief nurse and put on a shelf. That is not helpful. That's not useful. Staff nurses need to see the results of the data they're collecting because usually it's the staff nurses that are collecting this. They're the ones filling out the incident reports or the adverse event reports. They're the ones who might be tabulating the staff and the census for the shift or for the day. They need to see the results of what they're doing. If you're surveying nurses on their level of burnout or the quality of their work environment or how satisfied they are with their jobs, they need to see how they're looking as a unit and compare that to other units in the hospital. That little competition is very healthy, I think. So those are just a few strategies that might be useful in a health system. Is there one more?
¿Había una pregunta última o no? Vale, os agradezco porque así acabamos a tiempo y os da tiempo a todos a moveros hasta las sesiones que queráis. Agradecer a la doctora Patrician que nos haya contado un poco su experiencia, agradecer a todos vuestra presencia y bueno, cada uno ya sabe dónde tiene que ir para la siguiente sesión. Muchísimas gracias.